Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, baby Yodas and baby SETI Alpha eels, welcome to San Diego Comic-Con's virtual convention. I know it looks a little different. I know it.
I'm adding to the flavor of a large room.
Yeah, there we go. See, it sounds a little different. But I do promise you that we are going to give you the absolute best in edutainment, just like we always do. My name is Brian Ward, and I own one of these, but I also own one of these. So that makes me absolutely qualified to be an objective moderator for the Psychology of Star Trek versus Star Wars Episode 6. As always, we have two licensed clinical psychologists who are going to battle it out to determine whose beloved franchise reigns supreme as far as, real world psychology goes. And as usual, each of them will be joined by a very special guest who will help them bring it home with their knowledge of the franchise, because they're not just super fans. They have worked on these franchises. Let me introduce our psychologists. On Team Trek, he is a cognitive behavioral therapist who helps folks with anxiety disorders through his YouTube show, The Psych Show. He teaches global audiences how to use psychological science to achieve their goals. He sparks conversations about mental health through storytelling, performances, school assemblies, and pop culture conventions. You've seen him on Netflix's The Mind Explained, HBO's Doctor Commentaries, and A&E's The Employables. And he's the co-host of Life Support Live with Larry, Dr. Trek Nemechek, a previous guest of ours. Please welcome Dr. Ali Mattu.
Woo!
Yay. Representing Team Wars, she's a mental health educator and advisor at UCLA, and she believes that the relationships that we have with fictional worlds are powerful and can even be healing. She's also a consultant for writers of film, television, comics, and games. You've seen her in several documentaries and on the Blu-ray bonus features, particularly from DC and Warner Brothers. And she co-hosts two podcasts, the Arkham Sessions, which examines the psychology of Batman, the animated series, and Doom Patrol, and Lattes with Leia, a podcast dedicated to Star Wars through the lens of two successful geeky women. She's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Yay.
Yeah.
Now let's introduce their partners. For Team Trek, you've seen his lovely mug on television and in film with meaty roles in sci-fi's 12 Monkeys, Gotham, Supernatural, Heroes, the originals, very recently in Ben Affleck's The Way Back, and a lot more. And when he's not gracing your screens, he is developing and writing amazing video games and his own comic, Devil Inside. But today, he's here because he guest starred as Talek in Star Trek Enterprise. He's Mr. Todd Stashwick.
Woo!
Yeah. And finally, she is the brilliant creator of the brand new original DC character starring in her own book called Primer, which is available in your local comic shops and online now. She's also written for some of the coolest franchises known to humankind, including Marvel's Spider-Man, DC's Justice League Action. She's also the co-producer of Amazon's new adult action fantasy series, The Legend of Vox Machina. But she also has the incredible distinction of having had her name in that brilliant blue font against a star field as the writer of Star Wars Forces of Destiny. She is Ms. Jennifer Muro.
Hello.
Hello.
Ooh, make it sound so fancy.
I do my best as moderator. I don't get to talk much during this panel, so when I do, I want to make it count. Welcome, everyone. Here's how this is going to work. We're going to flip a coin. This coin, it is a Arkham Sessions Patreon exclusive challenge coin with Batman.
Shameless plug.
Batman doing the best with what he has been given as heads. my face and Drea's face as tails. And Ali, since you're not officially represented on this coin, I'm going to let you call it.
All right. Sounds good.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
I've been practicing. I've been calling a lot of coins all morning.
All right, here we go.
Heads.
Heads. Okay, we have heads. Ali, would you like to go first or would you like to defer?
We're going to defer.
Okay, so Drea, that means you get to go first.
Boom.
And here's how this is going to work. So I'm going to give the group questions, and then we are going to let Drea go first on this first one. Then I'm going to throw it to Ali to be the psychologist who then gives his analysis of his side. And then we're going to bounce it back to Drea's partner, and then back again to bat cleanup to Ali's partner for the final rebuttal. And then we will move forward, alternating back and forth from there. But before we get started, I want to make sure, psychologists, are you happy with the credentials of your partners?
Yes.
Yeah, they're pretty amazing.
Brilliant. Because in an era like this, especially here in the United States, I feel it's crucial for us to reach across the aisles and embrace differences, embrace change, be open to exciting new things, which is why for the very first time in the history of psychology versus Star Trek versus Star Wars, we are going to swap partners. Todd, you are now on Team Star Wars. Jen, you are now on Team Star Trek.
What is
I guess I
happening?
should turn this off, huh?
Your research is now null and void. Are we ready for our first topic? Excellent.
No.
Okay, give them a moment
we're
to
still-
digest.
Love this. Okay.
I'm still on Team Star Wars, though, right?
You are still on Team Star
and
Wars.
Todd is my partner now.
Todd is now your partner.
Okay, come on in. We're gonna do this.
Okay.
I feel like I just found out that J.J. Abrams isn't doing Star Trek Beyond because he's doing Star Wars: The Force Awakens. That's what I feel like right now.
Yeah. That it's
Won't let you down. I won't let you
seems accurate. All right. So
my love goes for both.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
Well, and that's what we're always trying to prove, and we have in 5 previous iterations
see,
of this.
can't we all just get along?
I want to talk about our first topic. I want to talk about 2 groups who have largely been defined by their strong sense of cultural identity, creed, and code. Mandalorians versus Klingons. How do these 2 groups demonstrate real-world group dynamics, and which group actually shows more promise in terms of social justice that we'd like to see today? Whose sets of principles seem more realistic? Drea, you lost the toss, but Ali deferred. So you get to go first. Please make your case.
Okay, Mandalorian. This is a group, a culture that has been identified as proudly carrying a similar creed, a strong code. Probably not unlike Klingon, they are really embedded in virtues around strength and bravery and combat. Like in the Mandalorian show, to learn that having particular pieces of armor made and identified as a particular accomplishment, like that's something that I think might even be similar to Klingon. So I think there's potentially some very very strong comparisons there. What I do want to name as different is that is a couple things. One is that the Mandalorian clearly state that they are not a race, that they are they welcome multiple species into their culture. And so just that alone makes me feel like they might have an advanced level of understanding of what an ethnic group might be. We're bound together by our strong beliefs, our shared experiences, the things that we truly aspire to be. And yes, if you act differently than maybe the code, like Din Djarin did, then maybe there are going to be some consequences. But for the most part, there's this kind of connectedness around that. The other thing I want to say about Mandalorian is that they seem to embody what a sophisticated group would think about in terms of actualizing everybody. So those two components include belongingness and individualism. So individualism is what it sounds like. It's the ideology that we should value the moral worth of the individual, not just the group, but the individual. And it's the belief that that we all should honor everyone's unique characteristics and be self-reliant individually, which is clearly, very apparent with the Mandalorian. But it's not just about the individual, it's also about community. So belongingness is also important. And we know as human beings that you need those two things. You don't just need to be an individual and have self-efficacy. You need to also belong to a community. And it's not just any community. You need to belong to a community that matters. You need to belong to a community, a group of people that have identified even preferable sets of characteristics in the larger society. So those two components together, in my mind, kind of create that sense of what I would consider a more advanced community than the Klingon. The one last thing I want to say about the Klingon that I've always struggled with, and maybe the Trek folks can help me with this, is Star Trek. I love Star Trek. Trek has always cared about bringing up and facing issues around oppression, around racism, discrimination, and othering. With Klingon, I struggle with the concept that there is an identified race that's characterized by aggression and combat and violence. And I'm struggling to understand how throughout, the films and series that this is a characteristic that's not just in their culture, but they seem to imply that this is like this inherent part of this race.
Well, my first response, Dr. Letamendi, is you need to watch more Star Trek. I think that's the answer to that. So you bring up a lot of great points, and you're definitely talking about the Mandalorians as a cultural group and as a group that many different people can belong to. They are not a race, they're not a species, and I really love that idea. At the same time, I think the Klingons are a better parallel to the world we are living in right now, and they've always been a reflection of the world that we live in. In the 1960s, they were kind of the Soviet Union villain, and we didn't really know much about them. We just knew that we hated them. And then we get Worf in The Next Generation, and you begin to see that there's actually a lot more diversity to the Klingons, to their beliefs. And they're not driven by aggression and war, but they do have this very strict honor code. And taking us all the way to Star Trek Discovery, which has a mixed experience with the Klingons, I should say. But one of the things I love about Star Trek Discovery is in that very first episode, the first 5 minutes of that first episode, you see that there's actually different tribes of Klingons that have evolved on different planets, and there's divisions between these Klingons, and we never really see those tribes again. So I actually think that they are a really great parallel for some of the struggles we're experiencing about racism, that there are these other tribes that have been differentially empowered, they've been segregated. But especially with Worf, if you follow Worf's journey from The Next Generation to Deep Space Nine and the movies, you see that he's such a great parallel for how we all experience culture. In some ways, Worf is very much Klingon. He's very much integrated with his Klingon identity. He speaks Klingon very well. In terms of food and cuisine, he loves Klingon food. He loves a fresh gagh in the morning. He also loves listening to Klingon opera. At the same time, there's other ways in which he's more separated and more estranged from his Klingon heritage. So there's a rich diversity to Klingons that I think someone who hasn't watched enough Star Trek would not appreciate.
Love it. Now let's see. Todd, you're now Team Wars, but have you watched enough Star Trek in order to In order to counter this, let's have your rebuttal. What are your thoughts on the Mandalorians in Star Wars?
Okay, so I'm gonna back up my team leader here and say that a Mandalorian is a choice. It's not a state of birth. So it is an ideology and it is a creed, and so therefore it's a point of view to choose to be a part of. The other thing that what we've witnessed in the history of Mandalorians, and it's evolved. There is a planet that they are from, and there was a social hierarchy. But if we take it at where it stands today, and what we have seen on screen, they have come to the aid of the oppressed. They have, like when the Separatists were attacking. They flew in to assist and help the downtrodden with their foot who have their throats being held up by an oppressive overclass. So they win points there. They stick together and support each other. Now, to Klingons, I don't know if I will ever meet the test of having seen enough in terms of probably what our fair doctor across the aisle suggests. What I have seen is, and I will back up that, yes, aggression, and it is kind of been presented for a very long time as a warlike tribe of culture. Taking what I've seen on screen, suggesting that there's other tribes and that they go off with different points of view, that was very, very lightly touched on. And Worf is the exception, not the rule. He is the outlier to say there is hope for the future of these people, but he does not represent the culture of them as a whole. So, knowing that the Mando waters are warmer and the hand to join is extended, it doesn't feel like the hand to join a Klingon sensibility is one I would want to take as a whole.
Okay, so let's throw it back to Team Trek. Jen, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, when we say versus, I'm going to take it more as differences rather than winning. Because
Absolutely.
I am just way too 50-50 on this. And as a heads up, TNG is my jam, Worf's my jam. That's my fave, and the original series and movies. Not that I haven't seen everything else, because I have, but that's where my point of view comes from a lot, which is funny. It's when I think of diversity with Klingons, I think of there is a psychological diversity in them, and Worf is good, even though he's the exception. He is good to see the reactions of him when he talks to other Klingons. Some are honorable and some are really bad to him, and in the houses specifically, obviously with his father and the House of Moog and what happened with that. There is deception in there. There's backstabbing in there. There's honor. It depends on the house. I think it is very relevant now because it is one race, but there is so much psychological diversity in that race. That is kind of how humans are in a way. That's just me.
Mandalorians are aspirational, though.
Well, I don't think there's any. You talk about, Todd, you talk about offering a hand to join the Mandalorians. I don't think there's anything more optimistic than watching the original Star Trek series and seeing these villains who just a few years later are at peace with the Federation and have a Klingon serving on the bridge of the Enterprise.
All right.
So they as a whole are peaceful?
Well, there's a peace accord.
there is. But it in fairness, it did take a Chernobyl-like event to bring that back.
To quote Spock, only Nixon can go to China.
This is true. So I want to jump onto our second topic. We all know IQ. I want to talk a little bit about EQ, emotional intelligence. I want to talk about someone who started out as an idealist, who started out, and during that time maybe dipped their toes in the waters of darkness a little bit, maybe at some point became a little more machine than they had been before. I want to talk about someone whose hubris and maybe even self-doubt also caused such a catastrophic event that they fled into a hermitage. Of course, I'm talking about Luke. I'm also talking about Jean-Luc. So I want to talk about these two people, Skywalker and Picard. We get to see their lives over decades as they age. How do their stories explore experiences of trauma, and how do they grow emotionally speaking? Is this relatable to our world today?
I'm really stressed right now because honestly, I love Picard and Luke's journey both so much, and I think they're just such beautiful stories of trauma, of trauma in a way that many people do experience it. I'll leave the Luke stuff to my colleague across the galactic divide, or the Great Barrier in the center of the galaxy, maybe is what I should say. If we talk about Picard, here's an individual who has experienced many traumas throughout his life. He was assimilated by the Borg and became Locutus of Borg, and was responsible for the deaths of many humans. He lost his brother, his sister-in-law, his nephew in a fire. We see that in Star Trek Generations. He has to face the Borg again in First Contact, and then again in Star Trek Picard. And throughout all of those things, what has helped Picard to stay emotionally intelligent, to understand what he's going through, to get what he needs, to emotionally be resilient and bounce back. It's his ship, it's his crew, it's Counselor Troy, it's the companionship, the meaning and purpose behind being a Starfleet officer. And what finally seemed to get him to a point where he couldn't be resilient is when that thing that gave him such meaning and purpose, being a Starfleet officer, when that was compromised. We see that in Star Trek Picard, where they're trying to rescue the Romulans. Related to that worm, that explosion, that black hole, whatever the heck happens in Star Trek 2009, that thing happens. They're trying to save Romulans, and Starfleet says, no, we're not going to save these refugees. Let them struggle. He couldn't compromise that, and he did go into hiding. And that is something many people do who experience trauma. He didn't have the support of his crew at that time. He didn't have the thing that's helped him, and the thing that always gave him meaning and purpose in life, that was compromised. And I think that's why Picard struggled so much. And his journey in Star Trek Picard is finding meaning and purpose and a way to negotiate all these thoughts that he's having in his head. I think it's a beautiful story, but I'm a big fan of what happens with Luke and the journey we see in The Last Jedi as well.
Drea, let's move over to you for your take on Skywalker.
I actually totally agree that these two stories, these two journeys, are really about the development of emotional intelligence, and really kind of illustrate really well how people who have a good sense of logic, who clearly are very smart, who see themselves as accomplished, and who know their, we just talked about kind of like moral sets and creed. Like Luke comes to a point where he firmly has conviction. He understands what it is to be a Jedi and kind of centers himself around those sets of principles. EQ, or emotional intelligence, is our ability to kind of get, it's not that we're not smart. We try to like override the logic and just tap into the emotions that we're experiencing. It's not just our emotions though. It's our other people's emotions. It's our ability to understand and navigate what we're feeling and let those feelings drive our behaviors. And then it's also our ability to to empathize and to understand someone else's experience, and let that experience allow us to behave in one way or another. I think like a young Luke early on kind of struggled. There was a lot of intolerance. It was, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to fight hard for this? Like, I just want to, I don't know that I'm up for this. And I think that's developmentally somewhat appropriate. He's yet to learn. He's yet to experience some real adversity. And when he does, the loss of his caregivers, the threat to not just his close friends but the universe, I think that really propels him to dig in and really understand what his purpose is. I've always looked at Trek to help me understand like social relationships, and that Star Wars is more about the interpersonal, like how do we understand interpersonal, kind of the smaller but meaningful relationships. That is kind of how I see maybe the benefit of looking to Luke for emotional intelligence. He manages to get past, that for a period of time, he's on Acto, he's on that island, really not yet learning from his setback. He feels responsible for Kylo Ren becoming darkened in his path. He feels that he could not have done enough to prevent that. He really just kind of lets that resentment and feelings of self-doubt and failure permeate him. It takes Rey, it takes someone else, again, a relationship, for him to be able to understand it's not about you all the time, Luke. And I think that his emotional intelligence, as it grows, as he's an older adult, really starts to manifest. He understands it's really not about his journey, it's about other people's journey, it's about their survival. And so he needs to go out and preserve the things that are important to him. He continues to be somewhat of a pacifist. He's not going to battle Kylo Ren in person. He's going to manage to participate in a way that he feels is still in alignment with his beliefs. But he also feels that because he's somewhat responsible for what happened to Kylo Ren, he's putting himself in that position and understanding that he too matters in other people's journeys. So I think that emotional intelligence is like a long journey for him, but it's coming through.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm such an original trilogy person. I keep thinking young Luke and old Picard. And I keep forgetting that Luke is now older and we've seen that part of it. But at Picard's core, he is a diplomat to such a core of who he always has been. He's always been empathetic in that way, and always trying to see both sides. And that is highly emotionally intelligent. I mean, when Luke started out, we unfortunately have not seen Picard back at, other than like Tapestry, we really didn't see much of Picard's youth. So, we're at the end where we see him looking backwards through his whole life and where he has been and what choices he has made to make him who he is now. And at the opposite, we saw Luke young, and then we skip a long time, and now it's, Luke on the island. So it's such an interesting switch. I don't know if one's better, but I just think they're different and they're interesting in that way. So that's my thought.
All I will say is regarding Luke Skywalker is he when he was young, he was being told to not let his emotions cloud his judgment. He chose to let them cloud his judgment or inform his judgment as a youth, and that actually saved his father. He then, I believe, allowed that choice of emotion to overbalance his choices as he went to become a Jedi Master. And that then clouded the way he taught his other relative by allowing his emotions to affect his galactic behavior and duty with his father. That same duty to the Jedi was then once again compromised by another relationship, his nephew. So I think, again, it's all about, we say this, the balance of the Force. And the fact that it took a Palpatine to bring him back to that balance and show him the error of his ways, and his youthful endeavor questioning his elders, he then allowed a youthful Palpatine to question his old endeavors, his older self, which then finally led him back to the belief of the balance, which is why he could raise that X-Wing just like Yoda, giving him full circle. And before it was, I can't believe it, and that is why you fail. He now believes it, and this is why he succeeds.
Todd, you said something right now that just got me thinking, how lucky are we that in both franchises we have these beloved characters that we have all looked up to for decades. And one of the ultimate lessons of both characters is learning from your failures. That like Luke meets Yoda again, and Yoda is reminding him, learn from this, grow from this. The greatest teacher failure is. And we see Picard meet Troy again later in life, and she's reminding him to grow from this, learn from this. I mean, we're both so lucky on both sides of the franchises to get. I think that's such a great emotionally intelligent message for all of us to have.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about some new heroes. I want to talk about Rey, and I want to talk about Burnham. Of course, Rey is from the sequel trilogy, Burnham from Star Trek Discovery. And I want to ask what they show us about healthy coping and self-care. How do they preserve or deny their heritage and identity in order to maintain their mental well-being? And what's the importance of legacy when it comes to saving the universe? Drea, you get to go first this time.
Certainly two characters that embody psychological resilience that have been, both of them have been kind of attacked for being too perfect, don't have enough flaws, are they real? And I think this is really an opportunity to show that, yes, they truly are realistic characters and have and really embody some of these characteristics that you're talking about. Resilience is one of them, and I'll stick to Rey. That certainly as a character that's essentially had to adjust and adapt to being a scavenger on a planet that she didn't choose to live on. That this was a story of childhood abandonment and neglect, and her journey is really about developing this sense of resilience and continued hope. Todd, I've never heard her be described as a youthful Palpatine, so it's interesting to reframe it that way. Before she knew that, though, her resilience can be described in a number of ways. When we say resilience, we mean our ability to mentally and emotionally cope with hardships. It's our ability to access not just our internal like mental capacities and the assets we have, but also how do we utilize external resources, ask for help, grow in various ways. And we see all the different ways in which she really embodies resilience. She is competent, which people don't like, but she's a young woman who's competent. She knows different languages. She can build a speeder. She can forage and scavenge successfully. She's creative. She is able to use her innovation to create protective goggles and gear that she needs. She has self-confidence. She carries herself with a strong sense of integrity, despite messages that she is not important in this universe. She has spirit, she has character. But then I also want to speak to something that I'm not sure is acknowledged enough, that she, on Jakku, we see moments where she actually feels content. And I want to name that because as she faces adversity and struggles to find herself, we see these like self-gratifying moments, despite the randomness and harshness of this like random backwater planet. She still finds a sense of contentment and joy. And I think that's not just difficult to do, but it also shows that she's able to kind of hold on to a sense of hope and understand that even though she's unsure about her identity, and her belongingness. And even though, as Kylo says very clearly, your weakness is that you're no one, before she learns who she is, that was very true. She struggles with who she is and who she belongs to, but her ability to find contentment in various moments, and for us to see that sense of joy in these very small moments, I think can be very uplifting as ourselves. We're all in some state, in some phase or chapter of our journeys, just trying to find ourselves. So I think that was very uplifting to kind of show those happy moments.
And this is one of those moments where Dr. Letamendi, I love everything you said. I don't have anything to rebut there. Ugh, even though I want to, I love Rey, and I love her journey, and I love her arc. I've struggled deeply with her being a Palpatine, I will say that. But I do think it makes you see things in a different way. That legacy, it's really what you make of it and what you learn and who you want to be. And we see that with both of these characters. We see that with Michael Burnham. We find out that she has been raised by probably the most famous parents in Star Trek, and she is sibling to probably the most famous character, Spock, and raised by Sarek and Amanda. And what I think is so wonderful about Michael Burnham's story is she is coming from a wide variety of backgrounds. If anyone hasn't seen short treks, there's a great short trek with her, and a story with her and her father really talking about some of their identity and the people that she comes from. And so she is a Black woman who lost her parents in an attack, and then to time, lost her mom to time. And then we see her raised on Vulcan and experience some level of discrimination there, but also take on some qualities of being Vulcan in that culture. So that's getting back at you for the Mandalorian stuff. Anyone can be raised on Vulcan and gain some of those qualities. But what is so compelling to me about Michael Burnham is her ability to code switch, to think differently depending on the context she's in, the culture she's in, the environment she's in. And sometimes it leads to problems. And we see this in the beginning of Star Trek Discovery, where she does commit an act of mutiny. I think some of her trauma past was coming into play there too. But we see that in the end of the first season of Star Trek Discovery, and going into the second season, her different perspective, her ability to see things from multiple perspectives, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, is what makes her such an asset to the crew, and is what brings a moment of peace between the Federation and the Klingons at the end of that first season of Star Trek Discovery. So for me, Michael Burnham is really a character that celebrates how important it is to have different experiences and to have a team that has people with many different perspectives. Diversity is better. It is harder. It's harder to have a team of people where people come from different perspectives. But if you can bring all those people together, diversity it's a superpower that will help you solve problems you could never do. You can never solve if everyone's coming from the same place.
I want to spring off of something that Drea said, which is Rey being about hope, a ray of hope, if you will. She, in her moments of contentment, to contrast it with Luke, a lot of people lambasted Force Awakens as being a retread of A New Hope, and I agree on a surface level. Visually, there was a lot of things that are similar, but she could not be further from Luke. She sat there looking at the horizon, waiting for something to come back, a sense of longing and belonging to family. Luke was trying to run away from family and run towards adventure when he looked to the future, to the horizon, never in his mind on where he was or what he was doing. So when Rey looked out, she was seeking family. She was seeking belonging. And the fortification of her being a survivor on Jakku, and then the found family that she got with Poe and with Leia and with Luke and with Finn, that fortified her so that when she found the truth about who her real family was, And I love the fact that she's a Palpatine. It creates a cycle of 9 films that are about the Palpatines and the Skywalkers and the saga, drama, high fantasy of that. I think it perfectly encapsulates this, and it answers the question that was asked of her in Force Awakens, which is, where is my family? Well, guess what? Careful what you wish for, because here it is. And she gets the answer, but she is fortified enough with all of the other people that she can stand there at the end, a Palpatine and a Skywalker facing her own real family, and be able to overcome the odds of the darkness and find that ray of light. So her resilience and her scrappiness as a character is what gave her the ability to balance the galaxy again and set them on a brand new course. So I will fight anyone who doesn't like this idea that she's a Palpatine. It is gorgeous. It is perfect symmetry, and it puts and the fact that even in spite of her being a Palpatine, in the end she claims, like a Mandalorian, I am a Skywalker. She draws a line in the Tatooine sand and says, these are my people. I love it.
Oh, well, it is hard. It's hard to add to what Ollie said. I think it's what's nice about what they did with Michael Burnham is that her relationship with her Vulcanism, even though she is not, unlike Spock, who is literally half human and half Vulcan, she is all human, but has worked so hard to emulate so much of that world and that lifestyle and that way of thinking. I think her resilience is giving into the passion of her humanity, but also having important reasons for doing the things she does. And I think her mental relationship with Sarek, in terms of them having that connection in the first battle in the pilot, she had very good reasons to do what she did. She wasn't half-cocked. And yes, it was a Klingon situation, but she really did it from a place that was, I think, pretty pure in her belief and in her, it's just a shame she got punished for that, but her resilience is taking responsibility for that, was ready to go to jail for it. She was done. And of course, then there's a whole show that has to happen. So, things happen. And then coming to terms with her relationship with Spock as her brother. And it's just growing more and more. And then by the end of, it was season 2, right? Season 2, leaving the way she did, and them kind of healing that. I don't know. I think it's hard for her to have been brought up by someone like Sarek and having the ability to tap into both. And it's funny because she's trying more and more to not keep her humanity, but that, talk about growth. I mean, that's not what this is, but in general, I mean, she is learning how to fall in love, learning how to do all of those things. So I don't know if it's as much resilience, but I think the resilience is her standing by what she chose and take responsibility for it and rising.
I want to go on to our next topic. You know what? I want to talk about the Kelvin timeline. And I also want...
Oh, don't do that.
And I also want to talk about the sequel trilogy. These new chapters, which are part of our beloved franchises, they put a lot of emphasis on the topics of identity, of belongingness, and ultimately a higher purpose. Which one actually makes a grand statement about what we can live in today's world?
So I want to talk about Star Trek Beyond. I'm a big fan of the Kelvin timeline. It's not perfect, but neither is any first season of any Prime Universe Star Trek series, minus maybe the original series. So one of the things that really stuck out to me about Star Trek Beyond is it begins with Kirk and Spock really struggling with their position. Kirk says things have begun to feel a bit episodic, which I love that line. And Spock is struggling with the loss of Spock Prime, as we all were, with the death of Leonard Nimoy. And I'm trying to figure out if his place is still in Starfleet or if he needs to help the Vulcans, this endangered species on New Vulcan. That whole story is about reconnecting with what is Starfleet, why they're out here, what it means, doubling down on how much they support each other, their friendships with each other. And it's about reconnecting with that purpose, that meaning. There's such cool research about how much reconnecting with the meaning behind what you do can help you through tough times. And like we should be having this panel in person. We should have had this panel in person at WonderCon and then at Comic-Con, and we can't because of this world that we live in right now. And something that's really helped me in this time is reconnecting with why do I do what I do? And how can I better get connected with that meaning and better serve that meaning? And whether you are a essential worker or you've lost your work or you are at home just doing the best you can with kids who you live in living fear of bolting through that door and just messing all this up, reconnecting with your purpose and meaning, that is such an essential skill that can help relieve so much suffering and give us the skills to be resilient in the face of all this stuff. That's what Star Trek Beyond is all about, and I'm a big fan. And I will debate anyone who wants to talk negatively about the Kelvin timeline.
Drea, you want to talk negatively about the Kelvin timeline?
Never.
You're up next.
Never would speak negatively about the Kelvin timeline, as I do not know enough about it to criticize it too much. I think there are a couple of things I do want to name, and that's, as Dr. Mattu was talking, his comments really reminded me about why we're in this room together, which is how these stories have given us purpose and given us a sense of meaning to our lives. The one thing I do want to say specific to Star Wars is that, which is how I've actually felt about Star Wars my whole life. This is storytelling around concepts of redemption, something that we struggle with. We have come to terms to some level that we make mistakes. We're not perfect. We have flaws. We sometimes do bad things. This is the human experience, and we also have relationships with others who have setbacks, who have flaws, who sometimes take a path that we don't agree with. And the story for me has always been about redemption in the sense of can we work on rebuilding connection and harmony, and can we replenish what we used to know? Can we restore what we know to be good and right across our shared beliefs? I do think that as the resilient story of Rey is truly, the central narrative of the sequel trilogy, I also believe that what's been a common ground, common foundation since 77 was this idea that you can come back to good, that you can restore yourself, that you can accept some of the mistakes you've made. And I think that's something, again, that's really hard for us to do. So I really adored this kind of continuation and this the story of Kylo Ren being about making decisions, the self-deterministic idea that you're not bad. Rey too. We're not bad because of whatever our bodies have, whatever our genetics have, whatever our spirits have. But we can use self-determinism and willful choice to be on the right side and do the right thing.
Jen, let's talk about the Kelvin timeline versus the sequel trilogy.
I think the two things I do like about the Kelvin timeline is, one, having Kirk have that happen to his father in this version, and seeing him and his younger self and this rowdiness and this, like, rebel, was a interesting kind of way to see Pike in a different way, inspiring him to be more and to be better. That was a nice thing to see. Also, Chris Pine's awesome, so that also helps. But the second thing is the destruction of Vulcan, which was really hard for me, but it was, talk about relevant now, where a major thing has happened that affects a wide swath. And how is that handled? And what's also nice is that we can personally see it affects Spock and how he handles that, rather than like Undiscovered Country and like Kronos. And that was a little more detached in that way. But the destruction of something so important to fans and important to Spock and big, I just think it's just super relevant right now. I don't know if that really answers anything, but I just felt like that's something that psychologically matters in the Kelvin timeline. Those two things I was really happy to see. Not the destruction part, but the effects it has on Spock and Kirk. So.
I think it absolutely answers the question. Todd, let's talk Star Wars.
Well, to talk about the Kelvin timeline and Star Wars, to talk about JJ Star Wars and Star Trek, you're talking about the same movie, because the Star Trek, the one that he rebooted, he just kind of beat for beat actually did A New Hope. I mean, there's the destruction of a planet. There is a planet destroying thing. There's a farm boy who's looking off to a future. There's the mentor. Like, JJ clearly was a Star Wars fan, handed the keys to the Star Trek kingdom, and he made a Star Wars version of Star Trek. So I will go back to the team Star Wars here. When I look at Star Wars, the gestalt of it, and including the sequel trilogy, what I love about it in relationship to mental health, it says the message, and it's kind of beautiful, is just because you blew up a Death Star once, your problems aren't over. Your demons that you must beat back, it is an eternal struggle. And it is a noble pursuit. And just because you pushed it down and pushed it away for the time being, it may come back to haunt the next generation. The sins of the father. So the idea that we continue to have to remind ourselves of these lessons. We continue to have to build our family and our allies and our teams to tackle these dark issues. We look back at 1968 and went, racism fixed. We did it. Look at us. Look at them in the streets and look at those old pictures. We did it. Luke blew up the Death Star in 1977. Yeah. These are bigger battles. These are longer battles, and these are systemic battles that we then keep continuing have to face and pass on what we learn to the younger generation so that they can be fortified to fight these battles when we are no longer able to as old people. So I think the beauty of the sequel trilogy is to remind ourselves that the struggle is real. The struggle will find its way back, and be ready, be strong, and be together.
Folks, I want to thank our panelists, Jennifer Muro, Todd Stashwick, Dr. Ali Mattu, and Dr. Drea Letamendi for joining us today. I think, as always, we have shown that we have a deep love for both of these franchises. So was there a clear winner today? I don't know that there was. But now would be the time for you to sound off down in the comments below and let us know what you think. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward, thanking all of you for joining us. Please be smart. Be safe. Don't just protect and love yourself. Protect and love those around you so that we can all do this in person in 2021. Live long and prosper, and may the force be with you always.